And we're live. Hello, everyone. I don't know how popular or like how many views this stream is going to get because I don't typically go this early in the morning. We don't have that many people waiting, so this will probably be a more low key stream.
All right, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, most people will probably just listen to this on the like after the fact, like after it's already over. And that's fine.
Do people do that, or do they prefer to like watch it midstream?
I mean, my streams typically, and this is whenever I'm streaming toward the middle of the day, usually, they'll typically get like a concurrent average of maybe 200 or so viewers, 200, 300, somewhere. But like, yeah, I do get a lot of people who watch it after the fact and comment on it. So that'll probably be the bulk of this one's audience. Because right now we only have 15 people watching. It's not typically what I, like the numbers that I would expect. But we are gathered here because, well, first of all, introduce yourself. This is JJ Plagiarisms. He has a YouTube channel.
Yes, and I rip people off and get paid for it. That's why I'm a plagiarist.
He's a Funko Pop also, which I think is neat.
Yes, indeed. So, do you think we should get straight into the debate, or do you think there's a little bit of setup we should do?
There's a bit of setup that I wanted to do. Like, first of all, why this stream particularly is happening, because like I have wanted to talk about Andor at some length on my channel for some time and just haven't gotten around to it. Like I made my 15-minute little like broad strokes review, which I understand you've watched. You weren't very happy with.
Yeah, I wasn't happy with it. I guess my least favorite thing that you said was, people who say that this is boring probably think that Kenobi is like really good or like entertaining, and to that I say no. I hated Kenobi far more than I hated Andor.
Right? Yeah, based. I did clarify to you a couple of weeks ago when we talked and tried to put this together that that was really just me throwing shots at Star Wars theory, which I don't know what your opinions are on that guy, but I can't fucking stand him.
Like that guy is such a Filoni shill, I'd call him, or a groupie. Like someone else on my Discord came up with the term Filoni groupies, and yeah, I think Star Wars theory, because of his high following, is the biggest Filoni groupie. Like I don't know, like, and he also, like, the same guy that I'm referencing on my Discord, he also really resents Star Wars theory for like talking about the expanded universe, even though he's not that entrenched in it, but he talks about it because it's part of that misconception that like, Filoni's trying to save the EU or preserve it or something.
Yeah, I'm with him on that. I've never liked his coverage of EU material because he very clearly like hasn't actually read it typically and will have just like looked up Wikipedia synopses. That's not always true. Sometimes he actually pulls excerpts from books in his videos, and you're like, oh, so you did actually at least read this page. So that's good.
I think what apparently happened is that like Star Wars theory has read some stuff, but not everything. And when I say some stuff, I really do mean some. Like maybe the Darth Plagueis novel, maybe the Revenge of the Sith novelization, mostly like the prequel, the very famous prequel novels, but nothing else.
Yeah, I would bet he's probably at least read Heir to the Empire. In the same sense that I would say the same about Dave Filoni. Like I don't think Dave Filoni's read very much of the EU, but he probably at least read Heir to the Empire when he was like, I don't know, 12 and really liked it, because you can tell he likes to reference it in the Clone Wars here and there. And that's like the only thing from the EU that he's probably actually like ever read.
Right. So should this lead into Andor or something?
Yeah. So anyway, what I was getting at is, so JJ Plagiarisms, you and I seem to agree on Filoni already. And I think we also, in broad terms, we agree that like Disney Star Wars has really shit the bed.
Yes, exactly.
To put it mildly, right? Like it's not good. It is, I would say, at least like 95% bad overall.
Yes, that would be the same percentage. Like I can't even like maybe the last thing that I liked was like Jedi Survivor, and I've almost gotten the impression that maybe the only reason why the video games and the video games alone have the potential to be good is because maybe Disney doesn't really care that much about video games, and this can actually be backed up by the fact that like the reason why they gave the rights to EA in the first place back in, what was it, 2013, was because they didn't actually care about video games. So it was just like, oh, we'll just get EA to do it, or whoever gives us the most money for the license. But then it turned out that EA executives didn't really care about Star Wars either. They'd much rather focus on their own franchises like FIFA and Battlefield and stuff. And so we got very limited Star Wars games, and they canceled almost a dozen, I'd say, during their during the contract. Like, you know about Project Ragtag, Project this and Project that, and they even canceled like the Respawn FPS game that everyone was interested in.
Yeah, they like announced that a couple of weeks ago, and then like within a few days it was gone.
Just like the South Park meme. And it's gone.
But I guess like what you're getting at is like the reason that the video games are typically able to just be anywhere between fine to actually good is because there's so little actual oversight from like the Lucasfilm executives. That's what you're getting
and I
at.
hope it stays that way, because if they allow people, if they continue to underestimate how much the video games can do, like what's the right saying, if they completely underestimate video games like they are doing now, then maybe we'll still continue to get an infrequent amount of video games, but when they do come out, they will be actually come from the heart, as cheesy as it sounds. And that's what I've been thinking about Fallen Order, and especially Survivor. It's just like this like Respawn, it doesn't feel corporatized at all. Like, I didn't like Fallen Order that much as a game. I thought it was overrated, but it's something that you wouldn't classify as a corporate product that's meant to just sell like hotcakes.
Yeah, I definitely see that there was like passion behind. I would say both games, and I'm even in agreement with you that like Fallen Order is fine. It's not anything to write home about, but like I don't hate it. It doesn't offend me. What I was getting at though was like, so that seems to be, and we're in agreement here that that's like one of the reasons why the games are typically able to excel, is that like there's just very little corporate oversight. And I actually think that Andor is pretty good, and I think it's for the kind of the same reasons. Like, I think because you pointed out in your Andor review, Cassian Andor is kind of a forgettable nobody from a movie that most people kind of like just overlooked after like a few months after it came out. It was a movie that was very like not character driven, and so then now we're taking this one of the characters in a not so character driven movie, and we're giving him his own spin-off show. Pretty much everyone was like, "Oh, that's kind of weird. I guess we'll see what they do with that," and everyone was just kind of ignoring it, fandom and executives alike. And I think that the reason Andor was able to excel is because the executives were like, "Yeah, there's nothing writing on this the same way there is for like Obi-Wan or the Mandalorian or Ahsoka or anything like that. Like, these are characters that people actually like and care about already. So we need to like, jam our shit into it and like force the creatives to do this or this in order to appeal to the most people." Whereas Andor was kind of just left alone and it was able to do its own thing. And I think that's why it did so well, quality wise.
Well, what I actually have to say about that is, like, I remember when Andor was coming out, I had as little interest in it than I do now. Like, when I remember I made a response to like Star Wars Explained, one of my least favorite Star Wars channels, because he's just so boring and he just talks about useless lore, and he always has a phony smile in all of his videos. It's completely insincere. But the point is that he was talking about Andor and he was trying to defend it with what I feel was really weak arguments, and I just like laughed him off pretty much. Like, oh my God, this guy. And I guess when Andor came out, I didn't really change my mind, but I guess I can say that I didn't really think about how the show was made. Like, you're saying that it had very little oversight, but something I don't quite understand is why it had so little oversight if it was like based on like the only near universally liked movie in the Disney era, and also the fact that like it was 12 episodes long,
I
which
mean,
would be like a big investment, right? Over something like even The Mandalorian.
yeah, like Rogue One was obviously like pretty popular among the fans when it came out, but like I said, it was kind of just forgotten about within a few months. It didn't have nearly as much staying power, popularity wise, as again like these classic characters that everyone's loved since they were kids, like Obi-Wan. So obviously, like if I'm Kathleen Kennedy and I want one show to be good and like to succeed, I'm gonna want it to be Kenobi. And since I'm not good at my job and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, I'm gonna have I'm gonna have the people working on the Obi-Wan show do all these things that I think is gonna appeal to the as much of the general audiences that I possibly can. Whereas, oh, they're making an Andor show. Okay, I don't even know who that is. I don't care. That's like kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I suppose I guess I can agree with that since like for what I felt the Andor show was being extremely boring, but it didn't like have any like the only retcon that I think that it had, that being that the Rogue One visual dictionary back in the day said that Andor's homeworld was Fest, from which was a level in Dark Forces. If I don't know if you've played that,
No, that's cool.
but
It's a neat little nod.
like they like retconned it to like what was the, it was started with a K,
Kanari.
Canary.
Yeah, they retconned it, but then they explained it away as like they forged his documentation so that it wasn't known publicly that he was from Kanari.
Yes, and actually acknowledging the retcon and actually making Fest a part of his backstory, even if it wasn't still a part of his backstory, even if it wasn't what the Rogue One visual dictionary said. Like that's actually something I am extremely forgiving towards. I guess since like the Fest retcon isn't consequential to the story of Star Wars anyways, like Andor could have been from anywhere, honestly.
Yeah, it didn't
Like
really matter.
like like it's not the sort of retcon where it's like, oh, it completely changes the story, and like it's not the sort of stupid retcon I would say something like dark science, cloning, secrets only the Sith knew. And like, oh, I always rip on that because it's like I see a lot of sequel fans that like say, why do people say that the sequels aren't canon? And it says, and my response to that is like lines like that, which say stuff like that is blatantly incorrect. And it and like, if I'm gonna choose whether Attack of the Clones or the Rise of Skywalker, which one overwrites the other, I'd say Attack of the Clones, because obviously.
Well, so I don't want to deviate into any kind of tangents, but like a defense I would actually mount for the Rise of Skywalker, which is something you'll rarely ever hear come out of my mouth, is I just always assumed that he was listing off different alternatives. Like he wasn't saying like, and this is something that I think most people like misinterpret that line to mean, but like I don't think he was saying the dark science and cloning were like the secrets that only the Sith knew. I think he was just listing them off.
But why would he
Not
say
really like it makes it any better, because like it's still just a very lazy attempt at going, hey, there might be, reasons Palpatine was able to come back. We're just not going to actually explain it.
Yeah, I remember when I read Dark Empire, which is so much fucking better. It's just like I made like one of my videos on my channel is literally called Dark Empire Destroys the Rise of Skywalker. And I just go to town on the Rise of Skywalker 4, and by extension The Last Jedi, because there's actually something that you could compare The Last Jedi to Dark Empire, and that's the fact that like Luke pretended to come with his, like, in context, like he was actually projecting himself in Dark Empire, but he was actually doing it for like a reason that makes you go, ah, ha, ha, instead of groaning like you did in The Last Jedi, for example. I'd have to, I mean, I explain it in all the context in the video, but the point is that like, I don't know what it seems like. There's always a better counterpart to everything Disney has made, almost.
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree with that. But to get back to what we were talking about, so the reason the stream is happening is because earlier this month you put out a community post saying, and I'm going to read this off now. Or I mean, you could if you want. It doesn't.
Yeah, I can read it off. I've got it right here. So it says, and I quote, I really wanted to make another video about Andor because I really resent it for existing. I really hate how despite how hard I try to widen my range and talk about Star Wars in different media and in detail, as soon as I condemn Andor for being boring as shit, suddenly I'm just a simple-minded peasant or someone who has a lacking attention span. Now I have the idea that Andor arse clowns, most of which are filthy casuals, think they know a lot more about Star Wars than they actually do just by watching Andor and nothing else. I've tried looking into what they actually like about the show, and I always hear empty arguments like it's mature or it's dark. It's created the impression that Andor is almost like a brainwashing program created by a cult. It's getting really annoying how much effort I'm putting in, but as soon as I call out Blandor for what it is, people tell me that they can't take me seriously anymore. End quote.
Right. So I saw that community post, and obviously, like, I reached out to him because, I mean, I want to, if I can, give you better reasonings for why I think Andor is good beyond just that it's mature or it's dark. And I do believe both of those to be the case, but like if that's all it was, it's really not anything. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. That's the reason this is all happening. And the other reason though is like there are people, and I'm not saying that you guys are all like part of the same amorphous clique or whatever. You guys are going to have different opinions and different metrics and everything like that. But there are a lot of people I've noticed in the Disney Star Wars criticism crowd who, you know, hate on obviously all the bad stuff that I also hate on, but then also they direct their ire toward Andor. And I don't think that's fair because I think Andor is actually good. And I said this to you when I reached out to you a couple of weeks ago. I think that if we tear down everything they put out, even when they actually put out something good, they're never actually going to learn, and they're never actually going to see a difference between the bad shit and the actual, like the pieces of gold that every once in a while crop up in the mountains of shit.
Well,
and so like if I can convince you at least that Andor is not as bad as you think, then I think I'll have succeeded at least a little bit on that front.
Well, what I want to say firsthand is even in the shows that like I don't like, I do try to point out positives when I see them. Like, for example, and this is probably something my peers all disagree with me on, but with Kenobi, I actually liked that con artist character. I guess it was mostly just because he reminded me of myself because I rip people off and get paid for it. But on the real, I did like his character, and I thought he was humorous. And well, I guess I wish he was a one-off character for that one episode instead of showing up later. It probably would have made more sense if Reva the Third Sister just killed him. Because there's nothing wrong with one-off characters. I mean, we've got Greedo, and we've got like lots of one-off characters. Like, you want to buy some death sticks. What was his name? Like, his nickname was like Sabagano, and like he's also got a nickname Sleazebaganano or something. Like, just like characters with one-off lines that like Star Wars is filled with those kinds of characters, and I think he could have been in line to be like one of the best one-off characters in a Star Wars show, if that makes sense. That everyone, I don't know, like I liked him, but all of my peers who hated Kenobi didn't like him. I guess another thing I liked about Kenobi was, unironically, the Clone Trooper cameo, which everyone seems to like as far as I've seen.
Yeah, I think, I'm kind of known as the Kenobi hater, and I have no issues with the clone scene. I think that's neat.
I guess I can't remember anything else I liked. I guess that's where the positives end in episode 2.
Yeah, no. Again, fair. I think that show is
And
utter
I
garbage.
do, and like when I was talking about Star Wars Rebels as another example, I tried pointing out stuff that I liked when it came up, and I guess Hondo the Pirate was one of the most consistently enjoyable things about it. It's like, while I do kind of agree with the amount of screen time it got, since comic relief characters can overstay their welcome if they're used too much.
Hmm.
I just wish that the other characters were more compelling. So, because I don't actually have a problem with how Hondo was used most of the time, but the problem is that the other characters don't carry the show very well. And characters are the most important things about a story.
Of course, yeah. But to get back to it, like the baseline here is like you do try to, when you can, be as fair as possible to these shows. Um,
Yeah,
and so I think, and I'm not saying you did this in any kind of like bad faith, but I don't think you were entirely fair to Andor. And I'm going to try to, you know, I've again, like I said, I took notes on a lot of your arguments in your Andor review. So I'm going to kind of just try to bring them up and
yeah. Well,
hopefully
I
just,
I will admit that like Andor, since I found it so boring, was not a very very easy show to talk about because, well, like when I like I'm not exaggerating when I said that it was probably one of the most boring things I've ever seen in my life when I watched it. And it's like, how do you critique something like watching paint dry? Like, if you had to describe why it's boring, like how do you describe why watching paint dry is boring? I don't know. That's probably not the same thing since
I
there's
mean,
actually stuff happening in Andor. It just feels like it's watching paint dry to me at the same time. But
I guess we can start with that because like that was one of the things you said. Now you went out on record in your video saying that boring as a criticism is ultimately subjective, and that like a thing being boring doesn't necessarily equate to it being bad, which I fundamentally agree with. And that also tells me that at least to a certain extent you seem to believe in objective standards in storytelling.
yeah, like for example, I think it's like the same reason why people might find like say a silent film boring, but like I don't know, like for example, Nosferatu from was it 1922, over
Mm,
100 years ago. Um, that's like considered like one of the best silent horror films that we still have, and
mm,
maybe one of the best horror films ever. But the thing is that it's boring, like not gonna beat around the bush. Like you kind of have to be like in the right mindset to watch it almost. Like you either have to be like the sort of guy who can kind of like create the sound in your brain almost, or you have to watch it like very intently. Like it's not something you could just watch with your friends and have a good time with. No, no, no. It's that sort of film that you could sort of have to watch by yourself, or like you were better off watching it at the premiere when it came out in 1922 because you didn't know any better back then,
mm.
I guess.
Well, but
But like
so
I
you
don't know.
said, and I'm quoting here, you said the bad kind of boring is something that leaves you empty, like as a blatant example, watching paint dry. So I guess I'd want to know like what exactly do you mean by empty? How do you define that, and how can we qualify it?
Well, the thing is that I guess contrary to Rogue One, actually, I didn't really see any value in Andor when I watched it. It was just like this guy just walks in, he asks about his sister, he gets mugged, he kills them, and it's just me basically describing the actions that the characters like took, and not anything about like any meaning behind it, because that's all I was able to get out of it. Like he asks about his sister because I don't know, he wants to find her. Why he wants to find her, I I couldn't be fucked remembering, pretty much.
Well, I mean, because she's his sister and he doesn't know where she is. That seems
I don't know. There wasn't a
self-explanatory.
lot of depth to. I don't know. I don't think there was a lot of depth to it. Like even as you're describing it to me, like I know it's like that thing about family and whatnot, but it's like, why is he looking for her now? Why is he so interested now? And I also
Um, The
pointed
implication
out that,
we're clearly given is that he's always been looking for her. He's never given up the search. He just
sorry.
hasn't found her yet. You're good. You're good.
Well, I guess the thing is like, it's just like, I didn't really notice that because, as I said, I was bored and it was just like, I couldn't really.
Well, so I guess that's my thing that I'm having trouble with is like, it seems almost paradoxical, right? You're saying that it's empty and therefore bad, like the bad kind of boring, because you just don't really you don't know exactly like what the story, like you're only able to like pay attention to the surface level stuff that's happening on screen, and you're just too bored to like look at it any deeper than that. And I guess I'd want to know, like, how can you say that it's empty if you aren't paying full attention to it? Like, and I don't mean that like in any way against you. I just want to know, like, because, and
It
you said
wasn't
this
with a
multiple
lack of
times.
trying. I mean, I tried to assess the first episode, or at least the first couple of minutes. Like, I don't know. Like if you've seen, like, since you've seen my review, you probably also noticed how I spoke about like how like it wasn't a very easy story to follow because like I don't know, like I always hear that thing about Andor being morally gray, and I always thought of it as like an excuse to like not have any straightforwardness in it at all. Like the thing is like I was thinking like with that mugging scene, and what I would have done to probably improve it and make it something you can get behind is like, what if like those two guys that were like giving Andor some shit and trying to mug him were like those subway guys in Joker who were just absolute scumbags. Like they were like in Joker, like those subway guys, they were just shown as some wealthy Wall Street guys who harassed a woman, and then when Arthur starts uncontrollably laughing because of his condition, he like the subway guys surround him uncomfortably and they ask him, and they're just such dicks to him, and like when he tries to say he has a condition, they just grab him and just like I think like I've watched that scene on YouTube like a million times, like just picking up all the details, all the subtle details in that scene, and it's just like the fact, like the things that they say about how like to show you like despite their limited screen time, what those subway guys were like. They were just absolute scum. Like they pretty much deserved everything that happened to them in that scene, or at least like as far as we know, because I guess Arthur was an unreliable narrator and he could have just hallucinated all of that, or like the subway guys were just normal guys, but he killed them because he thought they were awful. I don't know. Like it's subjective, but like on that front, but it's just like I don't know. When it comes to the guys in Andor, it's like I always thought that why the hell didn't you make them more like those guys? Because I think it would have been like more interesting if like I don't know, like you made the whole thing was based on like a guy like Andor getting into trouble because I don't know, he did something good, but since he killed people, technically he was breaking the law and he had to flee.
So you're talking about Andor here, because I don't know that the show is painting what he did as good.
I
Simply
mean,
that he did what he did out of survival. Like he's in the right. He is the protagonist in this situation, but like it's not like what he did was good. And I actually I think this is a good example of moral grays, because this is Andor being forced to make a choice to do something awful to protect himself after being put in a position that he didn't choose. So like there's no winning here. There's no I am all good here or I am all evil. It's very complex and it's very messy. It's kind of hard to pin down exactly what he is right now.
Yeah, but I guess it just didn't come off as interesting to me because it's like I'm just thinking about like they didn't really go like since I'd say that like Andor was being mugged and he defended himself pretty much. I don't know. Maybe they could have just gone further with it and be like, these guys who tried to mug him were like scumbags. They're like misogynists who like harass women and like just like talk about Andor behind his back or something. And then they try to mug him and like the way they presented it, it's just like I don't know. It's just the way they presented it. It was like when I watched Andor, it was very boring to me. It was like, oh, just give us your money, and we don't really get a lot of subtle characterization of those two guys before they die. They're just like they're just rude to him, but there's no
I mean,
like
I think we
deeper
get all
level.
we need, right? Like we know all we need to know about these characters in this moment for the scene to work as it does, and for then the rest of the story to be kicked off from it. Like all we need to know is that they're arrogant corporate security officers who think they run this town because they basically do, and who think they can take whatever they want. And then that's going to be a prevailing theme throughout this whole show. They essentially represent the empire and its ugliness.
Well,
Um,
my
the,
response to that is that I sort of disagree because like the thing is like I wouldn't get that these guys were actually corporate security guys until we're told that they're such until we're told later in the show when they're like investigating their deaths. Because when I watched the show, these guys could have been anybody. They could have just been
well,
some dickheads going out for a beer,
so
gambling.
actually,
Like,
no. Earlier though, in the scene where he's talking to the lady looking, and he's looking for his sister, he says you should help them first because they get upset that she goes to him before addressing them. And then she makes mention of the fact that they're corporate security and that because of that they think they can just kind of do whatever they want. So like it's already established if you're listening to the dialogue.
yeah, well, from what I remember, it's just like I don't know. Like, I still think they could have gone further with it. Like, just like I don't know. It's just like I guess you could say that they're just telling us that they're like those guys, but like like I just think back to like my example, like Joker. Like we weren't outright told that these guys were like high class, higher class Wall Street guys. We could see by their clothing that they were very wealthy guys and they could probably get away with a lot of stuff that the common person couldn't. And like the fact that like there's three of these guys with nice haircuts and stuff like that. Like I didn't really get that from looking at the guys in Andor. Like visually, they don't look like really anyone. And I guess I could say that of a lot of characters in Andor. It's just like when I looked at, I don't know what his name was, Bootstrap Bill.
Luthen.
Yeah, like he just looks like some older guy who doesn't really. He looks like just some older guy who, I don't know, he could be on the rugby team for all I know.
Okay, well, and we can talk about Luthen, but I wanted to get back to because you keep comparing it to that scene in Joker, but I think the issue with trying to do that is they're just fundamentally different scenes with completely different context, different
Yeah,
tones,
but I
different
know, like,
characters.
it's the sort of thing, like, I was just thinking about, like, I don't know, I was very much reminded of that scene in Joker, because I was like, why couldn't it be more like that scene where, like, you go out of your way to present these guys as scumbags who absolutely deserve everything that happened to them?
So you're saying that you wanted it to be less subtle, right? You wanted it to be more overt that they're
Well,
evil
I
and that they're
said that,
bad.
like, the scene in Joker with, did have a lot of detail in it as well, like a lot of detail in it as well because like I looked at the
Sure, but
comments of that video, like that a video that showed that scene with like millions of views, and they talk about subtle things like I don't know, Arthur thinking to himself visually, blink and you miss it moment where he actually thinks about committing suicide, and maybe like I don't know, just like specific things that the characters say, they're very subtly and like very done in detail to like push the fact that these guys are scumbags, and it's just like what I mean by that is like those subway guys in Joker, like they made sure to carefully craft every specific thing they said in the order that they did to make them as hateable as possible with as little with the screen time that they had, the very limited screen time that they had. And I don't think that like with those guys in Andor, I don't think that like they could have taken some inspiration or something, because I don't know what the point of like that is, because like if you're saying that like they're supposed to be like guys who work for a corporation, they think they can do anything and they can push those guys around. It's like maybe give that more of like an
I mean,
impression of that.
isn't that the entire crux of the scene though? that they're throwing around their weight when trying to take the money from Andor by saying basically like, we can make your life a living hell if you don't cooperate with us. Like we can have your ship impounded, we can have you arrested, or we could just straight up kill you if you don't cooperate fully. Like I think that more than conveys that. I mean, I don't know what you'd say to that, but
Well, the way you're describing it, it's like if they actually did say stuff like that, the way you're saying it, that might have actually been
but they
like
did.
better than what they actually said.
But they did like the actual like surface level dialogue, and there's obviously like subtext that gives away like deeper meanings to what they're actually saying, like double meanings. But what they actually say is, and I'm paraphrasing here, like, oh, I hope you didn't park in this part of town because if you did, we're gonna have to fine you. So let's see it. Let's see your wallet. And he says, I have this amount of money, and they go, that's perfect because that's just enough to cover the fee plus our own personal. Like they're being very coy about it, and what they actually just mean is give me your money or you're dead. But they're using their authority as corporate security officers to basically kind of like coat that.
The way I remember it, it was, I guess my response to that is like they didn't really come across the energy of the scene that you're talking about. It didn't really come across like that to me because it's like the way I remember them talking, it was like almost like the actors were bored to be there and they hated themselves for being in that scene, and like they were like, oh, why couldn't we be in another show? I think I don't know if I said it in my Andor review, but in my joke Donald Trump review, I was like, I had Trump say something like, oh, the actors must have fucking hated themselves for agreeing to be in the show, and that the sets must have been so goddamn boring to be in, and the director just didn't give two shits. And I don't know the vibe. I guess my response to that is that I don't know, the emphasis in the acting wasn't enough. I guess maybe that might be the problem, that this, the presentation of it all is like, even if they did like going back to like the scene in say Joker, like I was like very intently watching it because it's like it's something that you can very easily notice and pay attention to. But like with Andor, I just thought it was like, oh, it was just extremely like I don't know, for example, like it wasn't very lively, if that makes sense. And
I mean, I just don't agree at all with the idea that it wasn't like presented well, or that like it wasn't conveyed well in the acting. I'd pull up the scene and show you, but obviously I can't because of YouTube copyright. They would fucking destroy this stream. But like this, I mean, not to put you on blast right now, but this is kind of one of the reasons why I'd recommended that you'd like rewatch the show before coming onto this, because it just doesn't
like
seem like you remember it very well.
But I did try to watch it once, like all the episodes, and it's just like I found it to just be an insufferable experience because, like, maybe I could talk about. I thought that maybe I could talk about the story a little bit better if it was like if I was actually engaged in what was happening. Because, like, I guess maybe what I could say is like I don't know. Like, I just thought that the air of the energy the show gives is that there's like very low energy scenes where it's like I think like the actors don't act as intensely as they probably could. I don't know. And I don't remember any of the music from the scene or the sets almost. It's very blandly colored all around.
Oh, no. I'm sorry, just no. It's very darkly lit, yes, but like it has a very good like, I mean, I'm no director or cinematographer, but like the way this scene, and pretty much every scene in the show, but this scene particularly, like, is shot, it gripped me immediately when I was watching this, even though I was expecting garbage, because of just how rich and colorful it is in its own. Again, this isn't really my area of expertise. All I'm saying is that like it sets the atmosphere perfectly for what scene and what show we're about to get, and I think it does a very good job of it.
Yeah, well, I disagree with that because it just looked like I guess another thing I could say about it is it doesn't look anything like Star Wars. And I know Star Wars is what looks like Star Wars isn't very easy to describe, but I look at Andor, I'm like, why the hell are there like stuff like blue noodles? Because like in my Donald Trump review, I made a joke where it was like, oh, you just color stuff blue and call it science fiction food. That's just lazy.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on blue milk? I mean, I don't see how there's any meaningful difference between the two.
Blue milk.
Yeah, from the original Star Wars.
I don't know. Like now that you bring that up, it's just like I guess that it's more plausible than like there being blue milk from a certain animal or something than there being noodles that are literally dyed blue. I guess that's the difference I would say.
It could be
I
just
don't
like
know.
flavoring that causes it to be blue. We don't know what kind of spices or just like artificial flavoring that they have in this other universe, you know?
But like when I saw those blue noodles, I just thought it's so artificially colored and it's like very deliberately supposed to just be, oh, we're just passing it off as science fiction food. But there's no like rhyme or reason to why it would be blue at all.
I mean, okay, so to punch at your larger point here, I think we both have to be very careful, and I say this to everyone. I think we all need to be very careful when we kind of try to put a box around like what Star Wars should or shouldn't be, what it should or shouldn't look like, what kinds of aesthetics and like types of music that it should and shouldn't have. Because Star Wars is kind of unique in that it's able to be extremely broad and expansive in terms of what things it can cover, different genres, different archetypes, different tones, different, you know. So like when people like to say stuff like, oh, this thing doesn't belong in Star Wars, it's like, can you tell me why?
Well, again, it's like very hard to explain for me, but like I don't know, like I'd have to give it more thought. But you know, part of the reason like I didn't talk about Andor that long was like 40 minutes is like really short for like a critique of mine. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess I just didn't like care to talk about it that much because I thought it wasn't really worth talking about. Like I thought, you know what, it was. I guess despite it being boring, it was inoffensive. It didn't retcon really anything aside from Fest, which didn't matter that much because they did actually cover it. And it's like I did say that at the end of the video, but it's like, you know, this just shit's just boring. It's not worth watching because there's zero entertainment value in it whatsoever. And I give it a blah 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 out of 10. Goodbye.
Okay, but so I'm going to need you to help me out here if we're going to possibly get anywhere in this discussion. You again, like this whole thing is happening because you said in your community post that you've heard so many different arguments for why Andor is good that just haven't convinced you, and so that's kind of what I'm trying to do. But the only way we can really do that is if we talk about the criticisms you have, and we kind of go into them a little further than, well, it felt like this, or I don't know, I didn't pay that much attention.
I mean, like, I think so many other people have said that Andor is boring for the same reasons I have. And if I'm not mistaken, they had to air some of the show on television because it had such low viewer retention or whatever it's called. So I'm like, that's obviously something like how a lot of other people have felt.
Well, sure, yeah, you can
Show,
consider
right?
Andor,
That it
you
was
can consider
boring.
Andor boring. I'm happy for anyone to tell me they found Andor boring. It's
But I
just
mean, like, so
I
many
want
other
to
people.
define.
The thing is, like,
Sorry,
sorry.
can I just? I want to define
Yeah,
why
sure.
it being boring can ever be bad. You know, like we can't move on from this until like we determine exactly why it being boring is in any way relevant to whether it's good or bad as a show, as a story.
Well, like I said that, like, you know, I thought it was empty, like as earlier, but I guess you're trying to tell me that there's a lot of nuance in the first couple
Well,
of scenes alone,
well, yeah. It's just I don't think you
which
can call it empty if you don't have like if you don't know everything that's in it, you know, if you admit to having not fully paid attention to it, then I don't know how you can say that it's empty when you haven't actually explored the contents of it in any kind of depth.
I don't know. It's just like I've seen a lot of other like not a lot of other shows, but I've seen other shows, and it's like I don't know, like my presentation thing. It's like it's there's something about Andor that like that you obviously don't see about it, but I do, where it's like the characters when they talk sounds like that the actors hated themselves for being there and they just wanted to get there one and done before they could go home.
I really just don't get that impression, and I also don't see why that matters anyway. Again, in terms of like its quality as a show.
Well, I mean, like it's like it has this like it came across like the like it comes like it rubs off on the show, like like there's a common saying that like when you criticize a writer, for example, if they if they were extremely pretentious while writing it, then it comes off on the show, and that's sort of like the vibe I got off of Andor and the performances in that show, and how the thing was edited,
You thought it
how
was
it looks like
pretentiously
it looked
written?
really well to me. Well, I wouldn't say pretentiously written, like because I couldn't really remember the writing that much because I was so bored.
Okay.
But like the actors' performances, it's almost like I would like when I watched it, it was just like they were just talking and talking and talking and talking, and it's just like they didn't really have any dramatic like lines or anything like that, or like they didn't say anything intensely or with sorrow, or I don't know. I remember that scene with like what I remember of the scene where like Andor meets, what was it, Luthen?
Mm-hmm.
Like when like the vibe that scene was giving off when I was watching it was, do you want to do this and this and this and blah 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 blah, and I just completely zoned out of it.
Okay.
Like
See,
it doesn't
the thing
really.
is that that's a very reductive summary of the scene. You haven't actually described what happens in the scene and what it means on any kind of level, even a surface level, really. Um, and I can't
Well, I
stress enough,
guess
like
my
it is
main criticism.
fine. Well, hang on. It is fine if you think it is boring, but if you think it's boring to the point where you can't pay actual attention to the show in order to criticize it, uh, like with actual references, then I don't really know what we're supposed to do here.
Well, is there anything you wanted to talk about specifically?
Yeah, well, so like I had a lot of notes that I wanted to just bring up to you, but I guess if this is all we can say on the boring thing, we're just not going to get anywhere. We can move on. Um, let's see. We kind of touched on doesn't feel or look like Star Wars. Let's see. What else do we have? Because like again, you.
And I would just say
Oh, go
like
ahead.
something else I would like I don't know. I just didn't like. I guess the main point of the community post I made is that I resented it for existing because it's like it's just I like I would more than be happy enough to understand it completely and talk about why I think it's good or bad, but I never had that experience. It's just I found it too insufferable too,
Okay,
and I've
well,
always like tried to stick by my own rules, like by like if you're gonna talk about something for like 2 hours, then at least go out of your way to understand what what the story was doing or whatever. But like I guess since I was only talking about it for 40 minutes, I just didn't really care that much, and I don't
well,
know.
okay, yeah. So that's generally my stance too, and that's what I was gonna say is like, and I recommend this to anyone who wants to do media analysis in any capacity, if you want to explain why you think a show is good or bad, or a movie, or anything else that you're talking about, you need to understand it as thoroughly as possible. You need to watch it, you need to pay attention, probably take some notes, do some extra research, like really, really make sure that you know your stuff so that you can then, provide references accordingly. And like, either do that, like I would seriously suggest, if you're ever going to like talk about Andor in any capacity ever again, like try to make yourself, like, and I mean really try to rewatch the show in its entirety, pay as much attention as you possibly can, take notes, do whatever else you have to understand it as best you can. And then if you still think it's bad, then fine, but like then you can argue that with actual references. Or alternatively, if you're not going to watch the show, if you're not going to do it and actually pay attention, then just don't make a video on it. You can just say, "Oh, I found it boring. It wasn't really my thing."
Well, it's not like I haven't had an obligation because I'm trying to be a Star Wars everyman. But the thing is that I almost feel like Andor is a big roadblock on that, because as one of the most boring things I've ever watched in my life, it's just really hard to do that.
I mean, I get you as someone who plans to cover all this.
But I wanted to try anyway to see if I could talk about the show efficiently as I could. But as you see, you pretty much disagree with everything I've said.
Well, I do, and I'd love to get into all the reasons why, but like it kind of seems like we can't fundamentally agree on the main point.
It didn't work. Like, another criticism I have about like the opening few scenes that we haven't talked about yet is like the search for his sister eventually goes nowhere. And in my Donald Trump review, I had Trump say, "You ever heard of a Chekhov's gun? When you put a firearm on the wall, you got to do something with it later. Otherwise, it's just filler."
Right. So actually, I think this is an interesting point to go over because, and again, you've seen my my Andor review. So in my video, that was one of the things that I potentially criticized. I don't necessarily agree with that criticism anymore, insofar as I don't really think we need a payoff to that necessarily. Like it's served its purpose in the story, getting the plot moving, and it's not really necessary beyond that. And like it's even treated in the show as sort of a fruitless thing that's never actually supposed to pan out for Cassian. It's just something that he's been doing to keep busy and try to it's just been something he's been trying to do, but like it's not something that's ever going to work out, because like her home planet, it was destroyed, and as far as he and Marva know, she was on it. So like if we ever did get any payoff to that, it would be him finding out she's dead or something. It would be my guess, but I just don't think that that's necessary. No. I understand the criticism, I do, and I again used to agree with it, and I can see where you're coming from. I don't know.
Well, I mean, earlier you said that he keeps on keeping up to date with his sister's whereabouts wherever she may be. So wouldn't the thing be that he would want to definitely find out what happened to his sister after all these years, instead of just well, yeah.
So like at the start of the show, he's been hell-bent on finding his sister all these years, and he's been trying since he was a child, presumably. That's what's implied. But over the course of the show, his motivations have changed significantly. He went on a character arc. His priorities are different now, like completely.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't know that because, again, I was too bored, and he felt like the same character. And he looked the same as well, and that was weird, since isn't the character supposed to be 25 or something? But in Rogue One, he's supposed to be.
I'm not entirely sure.
The actor was too goddamn old. In Rogue One, he could be that age because whatever, but in a prequel series, he just looked too old, pretty much.
Well, and we're not given a specific timeline of Cassian's life, although you did say in your video that the flashbacks, which you basically wrote off as superfluous, which I disagree with. But like in the flashbacks, the there was like a separatist ship that had crashed on Kenari, which you said was like a contradiction because they called it a Republic ship, but then it had the separatist symbol. Now, as far as I understand, this flashback is meant to predate the Clone Wars. Like that's how old Cassian is. That he's this age, like before the Clone Wars. So, like as far as we know, that symbol that would eventually become the separatist logo could have just been a faction underneath the Republic. This would have been before they were enemies.
I thought that flashback took place during the Clone Wars, though.
I mean, it's never specifically stated otherwise, so I mean, it could take place. See, that's the thing is like if it did take place during the Clone Wars, then I might even agree with you, because that would be a contradiction. But because we don't actually have that as definitive information, I don't see why we would conclude that when the information we're given contradicts it. You know.
Mm.
I don't think it matters that much anyway. But that's just kind of what I'm getting at is like we're establishing a timeline. Cassian is already around 12 or 13 before the Clone Wars even began. So I think that by the time Andor takes place, he could be about as old as he's specifically, like as old as he's portrayed to be in the show. Like, I don't think that's necessarily a problem.
I thought his character was supposed to be younger than that canonically, though. But, like, the actor, because he's too old, and they didn't want to recast him or de-age him, they just stuck with him and just hoped nobody would notice. Like, I think it's a problem that Disney is definitely capable of, because I made a joke about Anakin being the 40-year-old Padawan in
Kenobi.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I made fun of that in my Kenobi video too. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, and I just slapped the 40-year-old virgin, and I just put old Hayden Christensen's face over it.
Nice.
I called it the 40-year-old Padawan.
I guess to address the argument that you made that the Kenari flashbacks were superfluous, they weren't.
What does superfluous mean? I haven't actually heard that word before.
Just not necessary, just filler for the sake of being there and not actually needed.
I don't know. I didn't really see a point in it because, like, his the sister subplot doesn't come up much later, and it's like tying everything together. Wouldn't it do something? I don't know.
Well, so the point of the flashbacks was obviously like it shows who Cassian is and where he comes from, what his upbringing was like before he joined, before he was adopted by Marva and brought to this planet, Ferrix, that's become his home. So then it obviously also establishes he had a sister, and that he's been looking for her. It establishes that even on a faraway world like his, the Empire's grip is its reach is ever increasing, and that it's able, like there is no safe haven from Imperial overreach. Basically, at this point, it was the Republic, but the same kind of thing, colonialism, oppressing the tribes people of his home.
I didn't really get that vibe, any of that watching the show when I was trying to watch it, at least.
I mean, I don't really know what to say to that. It's just what's the show. That's what's happening in the show.
I don't know. It just I guess another thing I wanted to bring up about the show was that I thought the pacing was terrible, and the same basic story could have been told in half the amount of episodes, and maybe I would have been less bored, because if they had a more condensed story and they had to cut some scenes out, maybe it's how to describe it. Like, what I'm trying to say is like almost like a book to movie adaptation. Like a movie might actually be still as enjoyable as the book, or as enjoyable as it can be with the book having an advantage, because they have to cut a bunch of scenes out, but at the same time they are going to tell a more condensed, tighter paced story, so it might actually work to their benefit if it's done well. Like, do you know what I mean when I'm talking about when I'm applying this to Andor? Like, maybe it had too much. I thought it had too much crap in it, and it could have been told in half the amount of episodes, because Andor, like, it does sound weird to me saying that Andor getting off planet instead in the third episode instead of the first. Like
Why?
I don't know. Like I keep on thinking like I don't know. It's just I almost imagine like something like I don't know, maybe like when it comes to like pacing, like I don't know. As a random example, what if in like Squid Game it was like drawn out to the fact where the first game ends in the end of the third episode out of 12 or something, and it's just
I haven't
completely
seen
drawn
Squid
out.
Game.
Yeah, yeah, but
I can assume from context from what you're saying that like the way the show is structured, it's like one game per episode.
well, not necessarily, but like like there's anticipation for each game, and it's paced out well, and like there's actually stuff that happens in between each death game, pretty much, and like I don't know. I'm just thinking of that as an example. It's just like that's almost like that was like a 9 episode show, but
Mhm.
like a lot of stuff happened. Like there was 6 games and bunch of characters, and we get to learn everything about each character that of note at least, and what their lives are like before they compete in some death game to win money
Mhm.
and stuff. And we even get additional stuff added in later. Like I don't know, it would be easier to you to talk about it if you had seen that show, but you haven't. But basically, I did actually talk about that show as one of my few non-Star Wars, non-commission videos, actually, because I just felt like talking about it.
Okay. Well, in terms of Andor, like I just don't agree that the pacing is bad, but I also think that if you were to cut almost any of the scenes out, like you'd be missing information that's necessary. Like the thing is that they're very tightly written episodes where every scene is accomplishing a million different things that are necessary to progress the story. Because it's a big story and it's got a lot of ground to cover, and a lot to establish. Like the first 3 episodes, you really need to get to know Cassian. You need to get to know Ferrix and the relationships that he has there, who all's there, that he's come to know, and of course, you need to see Cyril, the antagonist character who is trying to hunt Cassian for the murder of the officers. You need to learn what he's like and what the Morlana security is like, and you need to learn all these things, in order for this big climactic showdown when he runs off with Luthen and essentially puts the town under martial law due to his actions. Like these are all things that are necessary buildup. That if you were to try to cram that into one episode, that would be insane. Like we're talking Rise of Skywalker levels of breakneck pacing.
I'm not quite convinced. I'm sure that you could like set up a bunch of characters in one 40 or 50 minute pilot and have it end with Cassian like leaving with Luthen. Like
Well, so
I
that's
don't
the
know.
thing
I
is
just
also that you called the first episode the pilot. All the first 3 episodes all release on the same night. They're meant to be watched all at once. So those
well,
all
they're
three of
still
them are the
separate.
pilot.
But the point I'm making is that they're still separate episodes, though.
But it's a streaming platform.
And
Like it,
I
this
also
is a
got the
show that has.
impression, like I also got the impression that they're just releasing the first few episodes to artificially maintain viewer retention because it's like, oh, we've got 2 episodes or 3 episodes. Like they did the same thing with the Bad Batch, right? Or Kenobi.
No, I
And
mean
it's like
I have my issues with Bad Batch, in terms of how it releases episodes and how it overall structures its seasons. But like the point I was getting at is like with a show being released on a streaming platform, it has the benefit of knowing that like you can binge this show, which means that if I drop 3 episodes of this show all at once, you, the audience, have the ability to watch all 3 at once. And so it's kind of meant to be watched in that way because that's how we released it. You know, it'd be the same thing as if I dropped a movie and said, "Here you go watch this movie," and then you were like, "Oh, I want to watch this movie, but like I don't really want to spend 2.5 hours like watching it." So like I just it should cover everything that needs to be covered in the first hour, or it just shouldn't bother.
I I don't know about that because like with Andor, I just thought that like what do you think would have happened if they released only the first episode in it as it exists today, and they kept on drip feeding that normally episode after episode, week after week?
I mean, again, considering the first 3 episodes were meant to be dropped all at once, that would have been a little weird. And it probably wouldn't have gotten nearly as much interest, but only because the first episode is definitely all set up. Like, there's really no payoffs in it. So, like, it's going to be, you would feel a bit blue-balled if that was all you had.
Weird. That sounds extremely weird to me, the way you're trying to defend it, because it sounds like maybe it should have just been one big episode. Like, there's nothing wrong with having a pilot episode that's, like, really, really long or longer than a standard episode. Like, a lot of shows do that, like having, like, something that's double or triple the length, or maybe they even start with a television movie.
I mean, yeah, you can do that. Like, Stranger Things does this all the time, where, like, its finales will typically be like 2+ hours long, but you don't need to. It feels like we're splitting hairs here. Either you release it as 3 different episodes all at once, or you release it as one big movie. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah, well, the way I saw it, it was just like, it didn't really feel eventful enough, like, for like a television, like for an television show that's meant to engage you episode after episode and keep you to get watching. Because from what I remember, like, if I just blankly, like, lay out the plot, it's just like, he kills some guys, then he runs off and he does stuff at home, and they're in the middle of investigating it, and then it cuts to credits for the first episode. That doesn't feel like enough happened in a single episode, if that makes sense. Out of even in a show that's 12 episodes long almost.
I don't see. I mean, I don't see why. It is the first episode of a 12 episode overarching story. The first episode
like
only needs to set that up.
Could have more stuff happen than that in each episode almost. Like, in any other show written by any other person almost, I could almost imagine a show with no filler, with 12 episodes being long. Like, you could have like a show
there
about...
is no filler. So that's what I'm getting at, is like almost every single scene in every episode of the show is necessary, and it's accomplishing a plethora of different things. If you were to take like any scene from the first 3 episodes, if you were to just take it out entirely, you'd have a gap there now. You would have a gap in the story. There would be information missing that would make it a lesser quality product. I don't see why we'd be advocating for that.
I'm not really convinced that, like, based on what I remember, because, like, I don't know, it's just like, you could say the same thing about, like, any book to movie adaptation that had to cut stuff out. But, like, they found a way to, like, make a condense the story and abridge a lot of stuff and still make a really good movie.
Well, when it comes to book to movie adaptations, and this is obviously going to be case by case, it's typically a better idea, because obviously there are different mediums that have different story structures. When you're making a movie, it's typically a better idea to only take the information that is absolutely necessary to get across and put that to the movie, and then obviously tell the story from there and hopefully write it well. So, like, because of that, you are going to have bits of information from the book that are just not in the movie. But as long as it's not relevant to understand, like, as long as it's not relevant to make the movie a good movie, I don't see why that's an issue either.
I mean, like, I don't think Andor would have been bad if you, like, condensed, abridged, or even cut scenes, because, like, the thing is like, I think that, like, any show could have worked if they approached it in 50 different ways and still make a critically acclaimed show that everyone reveres, and you wouldn't have known it any better even if they changed it this way. I don't know. I have this idea that, like, there's many different ways to tell a story, and so really any show that or movie that we all revere could have been a bit or maybe largely different, but it still would have had the same reception, even if the story was different, or even if there were elements that were changed, if that makes sense. Like, it's hard to imagine a world like that, but I almost think that's actually a possibility with a lot of stuff.
I guess, like, hypothetically, there might be a condensed version of Andor that's also good, but I don't know that that's necessary. Like, that's all I can really say.
Well, I'm just saying that, like, I think that, like, Andor could have been more, like, loved across the board if it was less like what it is as it exists in the
Okay, but like,
in our timeline.
if we're just gonna look at the quality of the show itself, like let's say we have two different versions of
Well, the
Andor.
thing
We
is
have
that, like, I'm
hang on,
saying
hang
that,
on,
like,
hang on.
I didn't enjoy the show, like, and a lot of other people didn't enjoy the show.
Okay, but hang on. So, like, let's just say hypothetically, we have two different versions of Andor that we can put out on Disney Plus. We have the version as is, as the actual show that exists, and we have another one that's a lot more condensed and, like, technically tells the same story, and it's still good, but it had to sacrifice a lot of the things from the original in order to appeal to a mass audience. So it had to cut out like certain subplots or certain scenes that, like, other fans might decry as boring or forgettable. And so, like, if I had these two versions of Andor in front of me, and it's like, which am I going to release on Disney Plus? You know, like, I would want the one that has everything, you know, everything that makes the show what it is. And even if that generates less, you know, audience love, right? Like, if that ends up not like being as popular as option two, like, I just don't care. I don't see why we should ever adhere to that.
Well, I wasn't trying to say that, like, oh, we just, like, the thing is, like, a lot of what I criticize Disney Star Wars for is that it doesn't really seem to appeal to Star Wars fans at all. More like just mainstream audiences who, like, or popular demands. Like, for example, The Force Awakens appealed to prequel haters instead of actual Star Wars fans who are invested in the story and the lore. And I really hated that. Like, they just seem to go off of what the most amount of people would think about it, which I think was a mistake.
Okay, but can you give me some specific examples of that in Andor? Like, what about it tries to appeal to like broader audiences as opposed to, because I even agree that that's actually a thing. Tony Gilroy has gone on record saying he tried to kind of open up a lane so that other people who aren't necessarily fans of Star Wars could maybe get into it and enjoy it too. But like, do you think that that's ever done in like while sacrificing what could be a more faithful like thing that more Star Wars fans could enjoy?
Well, I guess I could say that because, like, as I said, it doesn't look like Star Wars or feel like Star Wars to me at all, and it does it in a lot of like, as I said, the blue noodles thing, like, and also the fact that, like, there's hardly any aliens around that I could remember, and it didn't even look like Rogue One almost, despite being the direct prequel.
I mean, I would agree that there aren't as many aliens as a lot of people have said they'd have liked. I'd have even probably liked more aliens than we got. Um, of course, in universe, you have to understand that this is a very humanocentric empire, and that a lot of these worlds that are occupied by the empire are going to have like fewer aliens in their population. You know, but like, I do understand the criticism. Like, I also would have preferred more aliens. You know, like, there's like a scene in Rogue One where Cassian is walking on this bustling street just crowded with aliens, and it looks really cool, and I like that. And I'd have liked to see more of that in Andor.
Well, I guess, like, planets do have different demographics. Like, I know that for a fact, like, in the expanded universe, that humans were a minority on a world like Nar Shaddaa.
But yeah, that's operated and run by the Hutts, so of course they'd be more welcoming to
I,
aliens.
I didn't see any, like, but, like, when I was watching Andor, I was like, it seemed like they just didn't care to do any extra work or something. It was very weird.
So, like, what do you mean?
Like, they didn't want to, like, diversify, like, the story, like there's, like, this criticism, like, I've heard, like part of why it doesn't feel like Star Wars is because it, like, isn't like designed like Star Wars. It's like it's hard for me to explain, but like.
Well, I
Like,
mean, I think that's mainly because, like I already said, you have to be very careful when you try to put Star Wars in a box in terms of what it can and can't look like.
I mean, like they could have done it easily by just having a lot of iconic aliens in the show. Like that would have been an easy way of making it look more like Star Wars. I think, like just having Rhodians and Twi'leks and I don't know, what else is there? Wookiees, like not maybe not Wookiees because they're supposed to be enslaved or scarce if they're not enslaved, but like stuff that would have like aliens that are like I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but it's just like it's something they could have had in Andor that I think would have made it resemble more like Star Wars, and the fact that a lot of the characters, from what I remember, were all humans for some reason.
Well, so one thing I would say is that, again, it is going to depend on like different planets where they are. There are certain planets that Cassian visits that are like pretty riddled with aliens. Like when he goes to the beach planet where he tries to like retire and hide from the Empire, there's a lot of aliens there. The opening scene where he goes into the bar, like you see outside all these different aliens and like these weird bubble things. Like it's gonna be a planet by planet basis, and of course it is, because like a planet like Ferrix is obviously going to be more humanocentric, or a planet like Aldani, where they pulled the heist off, is going to be a lot more humanocentric. There are human pilgrims that live there, and it's essentially a backwater world occupied by the Empire, so there aren't going to be very many aliens there. So you have to look at the context, like when you're watching Mon Mothma's party scenes, like there are a lot of aliens all around in the background.
I'm not quite sure because like I just remember like even if it's on like reading like for example like another thing I wanted to talk about is like when people say stuff like oh Andor, people don't like Andor just because they're so used to the Jedi or the Force. It's like there's a lot of Star Wars stories that don't rely on Jedi and the Force, and I also think those people don't understand that the Jedi and the Force are integral parts of the story of Star Wars because, the Force surrounds everyone and it has a will and stuff that dictates, like, where it wants things to go and stuff. And everybody interacts with it in their own way, which is surprisingly something that Andor doesn't have based on memory.
So what exactly do you mean by that?
I don't know. There doesn't seem to be like I'm not trying to like it doesn't really like Andor like didn't really feel like it existed in the Star Wars universe almost because like it didn't really have anything that like that you'd associate with how people live and stuff. Like you like I remember like a lot of people say that like oh it's based on how the average person lives in the Star Wars galaxy or something.
Yeah, I would say so. Do you disagree with that? It comes across like that to me. And to be completely fair, again, we're following a human character on a mostly human world. So of course it's going to show this specific lifestyle that's more accustomed to like what humans do and how they act and how they behave, what kind of societies they build. I don't necessarily see anything wrong with that. If it was a show about a Wookiee, I would expect it to probably take place on Kashyyyk, and we'd learn like different things about their culture and their customs, and we'd see them living in trees. Like it's just going to depend on who the show is about, and this one's about Andor.
Yeah, but like again, I said that it didn't really particularly feel Star Warsian to me because like it's very hard to explain. It's just like I know that it's lazy to just point at something and say, "Oh, you see how this doesn't work?" But like with you, it seems like I have to explain stuff, but it's kind of difficult for me to explain why I don't think it feels like Star Wars because.
So one thing that I typically try to argue when I hear Andor naysayers, if you will, say that it doesn't feel like Star Wars is the show is thematically the closest thing to the OT that we've gotten since the OT in terms of like what Star Wars represents. And I think that's a lot more important than whether or not it aesthetically feels like what our idea of Star Wars is.
I don't quite know because I don't know because I've looked at I've looked at Star Wars content from the 70s aside from, the original movie. Like I've looked at Splinter of the Mind's Eye, that novel, and some of the early Marvel comics, and it's like I would say stuff like, "Oh, that's far more Star Warsian than what Andor is." Like this Marvel comics, they're pretty wacky, but it's like they only had one movie to go off of technically. But like the arc where like Han Solo and Chewbacca are like contracted to defend a farm, and like they get a bunch of people to help them, a bunch of other skilled smugglers and scoundrels to help them out. It's like it's very wacky and it's very derivative off of, and it gives you the idea that they only had one movie to go off of.
But I've read those comics. I get what you mean. Again, like we can argue aesthetics all day long. If anything, I'd even say those 70s comics you just referenced feel less like, and this is very subjective because we're talking about what feels like, but I'd say they feel less like Star Wars than Andor. Simply because they kind of lean into the zany sci-fi. Which is they lean into the more like zany kind of sci-fi concepts of the time rather than the more fantastical elements that like you'll typically get out of Star Wars.
Well, again, I would argue that they only had one movie.
I agree, but that doesn't change what like that ultimate determination. It is what it is.
Just like, but I do think like based on what I read of the comics and Splinter of the Mind's Eye, that like they are derivative of a lot of things that like the original Star Wars movie did, like the hero's journey and like the mentor stuff and like the villainous empire, and it's just like it just feels more like closer to the source, where it's like,
well, the thing about hero's journey is that it's a very broad and abstract concept that you could apply to almost any story. I would even say including Andor to an extent. Like it has a lot of the same tropes and archetypes. Has mentor characters. It has the crossing of the threshold. It has all those things.
The original Star Wars did it. I mean, like, I guess maybe it was like another thing I'd have to say is that it was very difficult for me to get behind Andor, like because, like again, like I say, it's not very Star Warsian in my opinion because, like, I don't know, like the way a lot of Star Wars stories, like in the early days, typically told their stories. Like Andor has no resemblance. Like as a random example, like I don't know, like Star Wars Republic or something. Like I just think about like all the stuff that happened prior to Disney and how closer to like capturing the essence of Star Wars it felt like, as opposed to Andor. And I just like, I guess the thing is that there's going to be a lot of comparisons and like, I don't know.
I'm happy to move on from this if you are. Like, we can talk about other points.
Well, I mean, did you want to keep talking or did you want to?
I mean, all I could really say is, again, like, I'd need you to define the essence of Star Wars, and you'd have to be very careful defining that because you'd be immediately putting it in all sorts of boxes that it just doesn't belong in.
I don't know. It's just like when people say that it's like derivative off of 70s Star Wars, I actually think of stuff I've read off that was made in the 1970s that was Star Wars before 1980. And it's just easy for me to say that, no, that isn't classic Star Wars. Not even close.
Okay, yeah, not classic Star Wars, but again, you're arguing more aesthetically when what I said was that I think it thematically is much more in line with the original Star Wars than pretty much anything else we've gotten, at least on screen, like since the OT.
I don't know. It like aside from it looking like Star Wars, it also, like I said, I tried saying it didn't feel like Star Wars either. And it's like, I don't know, it's just like when I think of like how classic Star Wars felt based on all of that stuff I just described, it also felt like it was like a lot of like space adventuring fun, but it's also got like like the basic outline of the Force, which is like, and like choosing your destiny and like, I don't know, vibes like that. I didn't really get any of that from like watching Andor. It didn't really feel like, oh, Andor's choosing his destiny and he's going on like an adventure or anything like that, because I said that like what he goes on feels like the opposite of an adventure. It feels like homework almost.
Well, I mean, I guess it would depend on how you define adventure, but like, if I could for a moment just briefly describe what Cassian's arc is in the show, could you tell me how it doesn't feel in line with that same exact type of premise?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Well, like so Cassian's arc in this show goes from, it's very similar to Jin's and Rogue One's actually, which is something I appreciate. He starts off really only caring about himself and the people that he like immediately loves and cares about and wants to make sure that they're safe. And that's it. He doesn't care about fighting the Empire because as far as he's concerned, that's pointless. It's fruitless. It won't ever amount to anything. And he sticks to his guns even after actually landing a very successful victory against them that ends up helping the rebellion a lot. He thinks that's a fluke. He thinks that if he continues to stick his nose where it doesn't belong, he's going to get killed. Marva's going to get killed. Everything that he holds near and dear is going to leave. So he wants to leave. He wants to run. He wants to hide. And of course, Marva doesn't want to go with him because she's tired of running and hiding. She wants to fight the Empire. He is under the impression at this point that he can just find somewhere far away that the Empire can't reach and that he'll be safe there. But of course he's wrong. He gets arrested for essentially no reason because at the end of the day, the Empire is just trying to fill quotas, and get like slave labor for their prisons. So he sort of realizes over the course of this prison arc that there is no hiding, there is no running. At the end of the day, every single person is affected by the oppression of this evil industrial machine that's been made, and the only way to ever have freedom in this galaxy is to fight and to rally others to fight. And so he becomes, a rebel for the cause. He becomes someone who's slavishly devoted to the cause, and that's what we're going to see more of in season 2. That version of Cassian that he described in Rogue One.
Well, I mean, like I've seen a lot, like that's a lot of what you described sounds like something like what Jedi, a lot of like the ideas that like Jedi Survivor put forth about like how fruitless it seems, like for example, how fruitless it seems to fight the Empire. Like I remember that line from The Force Unleashed where Ram Koda says like, the Empire is infinite, and by the time you're gone, you have done nothing will have changed, or something like that. And it's like, I don't know. I just remember a lot of other stories doing that, but like, there's just something about Andor that like doesn't feel like that. Like you're described, like as you're describing it, it does feel like that's what I do kind of have this idea that, oh, that's what happened, and that was the context behind what was happening. But like, there's just something about it that was again so dull and so boring to me.
Well, so again, like what I was trying to do was compare that to like the basic hero's journey that Luke goes on in the original trilogy, the reluctance to do anything about the Empire because like you don't see that there's any way of actually fighting back. It's just too big, it's just too far away. He thinks he can just kind of like, go off on all these space adventures, which is already a pipe dream in and of itself because he's kind of being held down on this farm. But he thinks that ultimately, like, the Empire is never going to reach him or the people he cares about, and then that's what happens, and that's what ultimately thrusts him into this war. It's all about like there is no running, there is no hiding. You will eventually have to stand up and fight, and the only way to actually defeat this monstrosity is to band together, and give everything you have to the cause, and that's the arc that Andor goes on, and that's to a certain extent like the arc that Luke goes on in A New Hope.
Well, I mean, the thing is like, I guess Rebels, for example, tried to do the exact same thing or the exact same idea, and it's like according to the dialogue, but it was also extremely poor how it did it.
Okay, so I don't see why we keep bringing up like other things also playing at these themes.
I don't know. I don't know. It's just like as a Star Wars channel, I try to compare this to that and try to make comparisons to like what works so well here or what doesn't work here, or I don't know. That's part of what my channel does actually. Compare it to other stuff to see if it's on the right track.
Okay, I mean,
Because technically, Star Wars: A New Hope is Star Wars in its purest form, pretty much.
I mean, I guess, yeah, like it is sort of the standard that everything else is kind of trying to, it's the lightning in a bottle that everything else is trying to replicate. Well, arguably Empire is more so than that, but like it's kind of both of them. I get what you mean. I don't necessarily know what the point of saying that is though.
To be honest, I am sort of getting confused because, like, maybe we should just move on to the next thing.
Okay, yeah, we can. Let's see.
I don't know. I think like maybe our conversation is getting a bit convoluted, and it's like again, I didn't really know what to say about Andor when I reviewed it, so I was just like trying the best I did to review it.
Okay.
And I
Let's see.
felt like it was an obligation.
I did want to talk about what you said about the Mon Mothma subplot, specifically something you said about how Cassian isn't like the main protagonist of the show simply because it focuses on Mon Mothma and Luthen a lot too. Like what
The show is called Andor, right?
Yes.
And it's like almost like a point, like the thing about like the thing like something scary about it now that I think about it is like you could actually get away with calling the Ahsoka show Ahsoka, because even though it does cut on different characters, like Ahsoka clearly is like the protagonist of it, and a lot of stuff revolves around her. And it's almost like if I had anything to say about Ahsoka being better, that's what I'd say. And I think Ahsoka's pretty stupid and boring. Like, I thought it was like, I don't know if I'd call Andor stupid, but like, I'd call Ahsoka boring just like Andor is.
So, like, I guess I'd love to know where you're drawing the line here, because obviously a show can have subplots that focus on other characters besides just the main protagonist. Like, that doesn't negate the fact that Andor is the main protagonist.
Too much for its name, if that makes sense.
I don't see how you figure that. Like, yes, it focuses a lot on other characters because it's kind of important as in terms of context. Like, we need to know everything going on in Luthen's subplot. We need to know everything going on in Mon's subplot, because those are foundational to, the rebellion, which is what Cassian is ultimately like going toward in his arc. Like, all these things are going to culminate.
I don't know. I've always thought that maybe a better name for Andor would be something like Prelude to Rogue One or something, which is a pretty lazy name, I know, but I thought it was better than Andor.
But the show's about Andor. Like the whole plot centers around him, and it's kickstarted by him and his actions. Like it's a Cassian Andor show.
I didn't really feel like that because, like, I don't know, it just like focused on stuff that seemed like it had like no direct like influence on Andor, like the broader stuff, for example. Like, yeah, you can do broader stuff, but like Andor seemed to have nothing to do with that shit.
But it's about the rebellion, which is essential to telling the story about Cassian. It's about Cassian joining the rebellion and about building and about the rebellion being built up. That's what the show's about. You cannot tell a story about Cassian Andor's origin story without seriously focusing on the rebellion. Like, you just can't do that.
I mean,
that would be like if you had an origin story about Boba Fett, and it had nothing to do with like bounty hunting.
I don't know how I respond to that, but like, let me just think for a minute. Like, I don't know. Like, I just thought it didn't focus on Andor as much as it should have for a show that's called Andor, because it felt like there were like three main characters that get equal amount of screen time or whatever, and it's like
I'd
one of
hardly
them.
say it's equal.
Like I'm not gonna say like what I'm trying to say is that like out of like the original trilogy, like Luke, Han, and Leia, obviously Luke is the main one of the three, even though they can all be considered protagonists. But
Yeah.
with Andor, it's like they're shared equally, and you can't tell us if it wasn't named who the main character is.
I mean, I would assume if I didn't know the title of the show, I would assume that if we started the first 3 episodes focusing on this one guy, and he's the central focus of the show, that like, oh, I'd be like, oh, this is about him, probably.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure because it also cuts to like Cyril, Tobey Maguire. Like I don't know if people joke that he looks like Tobey Maguire, so I just hopped along with that joke as well.
Okay, yeah, but just because it focuses on Cyril also doesn't like that'd be like if I said, "Oh, is this about Vader?" If I was watching A New Hope, just because he shows up also, like we occasionally cut back to him. It's like, oh, is this not actually about Luke?
Another thing I'd have to say about like how the perspectives I've done is just like it didn't really feel like it tied all back to Andor because they seem to be like far away from Andor when these characters are doing stuff and they don't directly correlate to him, if that makes sense.
I mean, Mon Mothma is connected to Luthen, who's connected to Andor, like significantly. Like their plot lines converge, like almost completely.
I don't know. It just felt like to me like it was just like a rabbit hole of. It's almost like that like thing about like you shaked hands with someone who also shook hands with someone who shook hands with someone who shook hands with someone who was married to someone who was the brother of someone who met the president or something.
So okay, hang on. So if Cassian and Mon Mothma had had a scene together, like even just one scene, would that have alleviated this criticism?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Like they do interact on screen in like Rogue One. I don't know why they wouldn't in this show.
Well, they're also going to in season 2. We've already seen like behind the scenes stuff on that front. It's just like, yeah. Have you ever seen Game of Thrones?
No,
Actually,
I don't really like fantasy.
Game of Thrones is a bad example anyway. Lord of the Rings, you seen that?
Again, I don't like fantasy, so unfortunately, no. I actually tried to get through 10 minutes of it, but it took forever to get started. And so I just turned it off. Or if someone else was watching it, like my brothers, I just walk out of the room and do something else. Because like when I was watching Lord of the Rings, it was just, that's what I'd say about it. It took forever to get started.
Okay, yeah. Well, the point I was getting at is that like, in Lord of the Rings, like Frodo is the main character. He is the protagonist of the story. There are characters who are focused on and have their own plot lines in those movies who have never met Frodo, never will, don't interact with him at all. That's okay. That is allowed because this is a very big story that's about more than
I would
just
like
Frodo.
say that with something like the Thrawn trilogy, for example, like Thrawn doesn't interact with really any of the original characters, if I remember.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
that's something I noted when I read those books too.
Like, and it's strange. Like, maybe like it is strange when I was reading it. Was like, is this guy ever going to meet any of the main characters?
But I wouldn't consider that a criticism at all. Like you don't need that to happen for the story. Like that's a nothing criticism.
I don't. Well, the point I was making is like it didn't really feel like a problem in the Thrawn trilogy, but like since like the Thrawn trilogy is a more broad story, where some like whereas Andor is supposed to be like Andor. I don't know.
No, Andor is a very broad story. It's telling a very large scale story. It's not just about Cassian.
Well, again, maybe they should have called it something else then.
Why?
Because, like, I don't know, like it gives the impression that it's a smaller scale show than what it actually is. And maybe that's just a minor criticism, but it's like, the name kind of sucks based on what the show actually is. If you're trying to argue that it's higher scale,
I mean, I'd argue that the names of a lot of Star Wars shows just being the name of the main character is pretty lazy. Like I'd even say that for Andor too, but I don't see that as like as an issue in the same way you're presenting it. Like you're acting like it's false advertising that a show called Andor might have certain plot lines that focus on things that aren't Andor.
yeah, you know what? You're right. I concede.
Okay. Well, all right. In that case, some other things I wanted to talk about when you mentioned the Mon Mothma scenes is well, it's kind of something we've already been over. You very like reductively just kind of summarize them in very broad terms without actually engaging in what any of them were. So like, do you have any?
I heard someone else say this, but like they teased us that we were going to see Sly more, but she doesn't actually show up in the show. Would you say that's a valid criticism? How they tease us, but she doesn't actually show up?
No. We
Why
don't need her for it's like you know how they mentioned the Emperor, but like he also doesn't show up. It's like you can mention characters that we know and that we recognize with our monkey brain without them needing to actually appear for us to go.
I think the reason that criticism was made was because, well, it's sort of like what Filoni does. He loves to tease us with like, oh, I'm going to bring this back, or am I going to bring this back? And he just like, it's the sort of thing that Filoni would do. And
okay, and Filoni sucked ass, so like...
And I know that he wasn't involved in this show, but like, the thing is that when he dominates a lot of mainstream Star Wars content, that you're bound to, like, when something like that happens, it's like, oh, are they fucking taunting us? Like, that sort of thing.
I mean, it's just a reference. Like in the same scene, this is obviously a smaller reference because it's a Rebels reference, but like, she references the Gorman conflict, which is something that she brought up in Rebels season 3. But like, we don't then need to see the Gormans suffering from like starvation or whatever the problem was, just because she mentioned that, and that was a reference to another thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I was wondering what you thought of that.
Yeah, I don't consider that an issue at all. Like if we had a scene and Slymore was there, like that'd be cool, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't detract from the show that she doesn't appear.
Know, just like when I was hearing the criticism, it felt like she was going to show up. Like it wasn't just like a mention of an overarching character like the Emperor. And besides, Slymore is completely underused in Disney canon, anyways. Like from what I heard, since Revenge, she wasn't seen until like one of the Darth Vader comics in like 2020 or something.
Mm-hmm. Which take place post Empire Strikes Back.
It's like that's like what, like 15 years in like technically in releases, like until something that's considered Disney canon actually shows up. And I think like I guess maybe I'd make a criticism that like a lot of characters are underused, that were highly used in the expanded universe, but they aren't in Disney canon for some reason. And it's the same thing I'd say about Quill and Voss, but we're getting off topic. So what were you going to ask me?
Well, specifically in terms of the Mon Mothma storylines, like the way you summarize them. Let me actually find them in my notes. You said Mon Mothma was in the show, and I couldn't really tell you what her role is. So like her role, she plays a few different roles, but like in a literal sense, what she's there for is she is the financier of the rebellion, or at least one of the main ones that Luthen relies on to fund resources for this fledgling rebellion that he's trying to build, which is obviously becoming a lot harder for her because she's being constantly surveilled by the Empire, and so she's having to like work with people that she doesn't necessarily trust and that she doesn't necessarily like, and make all sorts of horrible, sketchy deals that she'd rather not make. Including selling her daughter into an arranged marriage, just to have access to her funds without Imperial.
That's what I remember from the show, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, she does all that. Like the themes around her are very, very good. It's what are you willing to do? How far are you willing to go? When is enough enough? And like, when do you become just as bad as what you're fighting against ultimately? You know,
I don't know. Like for some reason, like when you mentioned that, I thought that like Mon Mothma was like an uncorruptible leader almost. Like
um,
that's how she was presented earlier, like like a pure good character who doesn't compromise anything, and maybe that makes for a more boring character. But like
I would
from
say
what I
so.
remember, that's how she's supposed to be presented. Like ever since like the original trilogy, she wasn't supposed to be a very complex character. She was just supposed to be like the pure good leader of the rebellion who wanted things for the good of everyone, and even if
Okay,
it
well,
meant
so that's what.
compromising easy victories. She always chose the moral path or something. I
So I
don't know.
mean, just because that's all she's presented, and she's very thinly presented in all of her canon appearances anyway. Like Rogue One, Rebels, Return of the Jedi, like all of those like don't really do much with her character anyway. So I don't think we know enough about her or her morals or her principles and what she's willing to
Well,
like what lines she's willing to cross.
well, even like in the expanded universe and the movies and stuff, like I remember her not being a very complex character. Like the focus in all the post Return of the Jedi crap was always on, like the characters that like actually like aren't like I always remembered that like even Admiral Akbar had more development than Mon Mothma, for example.
So okay, but like, would you consider it a bad thing that this show is now trying to take one of the central figureheads of the rebellion and give her a deeper, more complex character?
Well, I would say, well, not no, actually, I wouldn't say that it was a bad thing, but like I don't know, like I just thought that like Mon Mothma was always the incorruptible leader of the rebellion. Like,
I I don't know how you figure because like again, we just didn't know anything about her really, in
well,
terms of
that's like,
canonical appearances.
well, the thing is like she was always presented as like always presented like that, so I didn't think anything different. Like 40 years of content, and this is the first time we're getting a more complex character or something. It's strange.
Well, okay, like if I were to try to use an example, like Obi-Wan in the OT, specifically A New Hope, because that's where he mainly appears, but obviously he shows up as a Force Ghost. What would you describe Obi-Wan's character as just in terms of the original trilogy?
Well, the wise mentor character, pretty much.
Okay. You know, he's typically the all good, like very wise person who wants to set Luke on the right path and train him as a Jedi. Like that's like in bare bones, that's what you would describe Obi-Wan as.
Yeah,
So if
like I don't know. He always seemed like the sort of character who could make a younger, more naive or vulnerable character with a prequel. Because obviously, like, there's a path for every mentor before they become the mentor. But like, Mon Mothma always seemed to be like the sort of static character, if that makes sense.
well, okay, so that's what I was getting at. Obi-Wan in the original trilogy is pretty static. His motivations and goals do not really change throughout the story. He wants Luke to kill Vader because he sees that's the only way. And at the end, of course, he's proven wrong, but that's at the end of the story. That's the only change, really. Um, my point is like you have this version of Obi-Wan that exists. Now you're telling prequel stories, and of course there are like supplementary stories as well, like the expanded universe and whatever else that are able to take that character and sort of send him on darker journeys, sort of test his mettle, you know, like give him a more complex arc and more like nuances and gray areas in terms of like
Yeah, I
his
would say
principles
that
and
I prefer the
moralities.
prequel Obi Wan because he's a more interesting character there.
Yeah, I agree. I've always preferred Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan
But
over
I
Alec
guess
Guinness.
but I guess maybe the point I'm making is that even in prequel stories, Mon Mothma never really did much aside from being a good politician person who doesn't compromise anything. I don't know. It's just
Okay.
like
Well, so yeah,
even
what I'm
when
getting at is like why can't they take a character like Mon Mothma in this prequel setting and give her more complexities?
hmm, yeah, that's a good point. I just thought it just was out of place because we didn't really get that like anywhere else. like Disney canon doesn't really build towards that. It's mostly just something that like Andor pretty much invented, because in Rogue One or Rebels or even anything in the expanded universe, she wasn't a very complex character at all.
Right. They took a character where there wasn't much to work with and they made something out of it.
Yeah, I just thought that maybe it was a bit jarring because like it was never a thing beforehand. And even when it could have been a thing, it wasn't.
But okay, so like when she appears in Return of the Jedi, like the story really isn't about her. She's kind of a secondary, like a side character. So like why would it be there? You know, like why would the more complex aspects of her character
I'm talking
exist
about
there?
stuff that even has more time. Like, for example, she could have, like, even in like the deleted scene with like the rebellion subplot in Revenge of the Sith, she's just there, if that makes sense. Or even something like The Force Unleashed, which deals with like the origins of rebellion. She's just like there, and like she isn't given much development. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's just like,
I feel like we're talking in circles here. Like, yes, she wasn't much of a character beforehand. They took that and they ran with it and they made something deeper and more complex. And I would argue much better written. And I'm failing to see the issue.
yeah, I guess, yeah, I can kind of see. I don't know, like, I don't know. It's just that, like, I don't know. It's just like, I guess maybe what I was trying to say is like, I don't know, like, maybe some characters are just best structured in a certain way, and being as rich and being, because I don't know, it's like, I just always saw it as like, a character, like, isn't supposed to have a lot of complexity. Like, for example, like, as interesting as, say, maybe the Darth Sidious is, for example, he doesn't need like to have a reason to like be that complex and like why he's so evil and stuff. He's just is or something. Like, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but like,
Well, like with Darth Sidious, like sure, what we have in the prequels and the original trilogy, which I would argue is already fairly complex, but even just assuming he's a pretty simple one note character, like if they were to make like if they were to adapt the Darth Plagueis novel 1-to-1, you know, which obviously takes his character and makes him a lot more complex and dynamic, would that be an issue?
well, I'd say even with the Darth Plagueis novel that he was still very rooted in like being completely irredeemable, and he didn't really have a justifiable reason for being evil at all. He just like, and he was
The
pretty selfish
justifiable
from
reason
the
was he
start
wanted
and
power.
born to be a Sith and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we can do you want to move on to a different point?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. So we talked about Mon Mothma. You did also actually one more thing on Mon Mothma. I promise this is a different thing. Something that I took note of was you said that I get like Generation Tech apparently implied that she is in an arranged marriage with Perrin, her husband, and that's why like there doesn't seem to be any love, or as you put it, like any chemistry. Um,
Yeah.
that's not implied. That's just straight up said. Like that's just in the show.
Well, which episode was it done? Was it later in the series? Because maybe they were guessing before the reveal or something.
I believe it was episode 5. I know it was part of one of the mini dinner party scenes. And it's of course hinted at throughout the like all the episodes that they're in together. Um, it's made very clear that it's a custom on Chandrila where they're from to have politically arranged marriages, and that they married when they were very young. He was 16, she was 15. That's not something she wanted for her daughter, but that's ultimately what she had to do in order to secure this deal with this sketchy businessman so that she could move her funds free of imperial scrutiny. Like that's what they're getting at there, is that she doesn't want her daughter to have the same kind of life and loveless marriage that she has, but she has no choice but to do that to her.
You know, like I don't know. I don't feel like that's something like since like Mon Mothma's supposed to be like the incorruptible leader of the rebellion again, that would be something that she would do. I don't know. It's something based on all of her previous depictions that seems out of character, even though we didn't really explore her character, if that makes sense.
I just don't agree. Like, it's something that she really struggles with because obviously it goes against every moral principle that she has, but like she's ultimately devoted to this rebellion. She will do anything to make sure that it stays afloat and that she can continue operating with impunity and without scrutiny so that she can help the rebellion as freely as possible.
I don't know. It just seemed to me that like she would do anything to keep the rebellion afloat, but like she would also not cross a moral line. That just always came across what a character was like.
You do understand that like this rebellion is necessary if her daughter has any chance of ever having like a free and happy life, like outside of imperial rule, you know? Like ultimately she's like hurting her daughter, but like it is
I know the complexities in it, but like I'm just saying that like in every story previous, it was always portrayed as like never crossing a line, even if it doesn't benefit your rebellion, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, and again, like we've already kind of gone around on this one. We can move on. Let's see. Flashbacks. Yeah, you said that already. Slow pacing. We've already gone over that. Okay. One thing. You said that the finale doesn't hit hard enough.
Yes, by the time it happens, like I don't know, like in my experience watching the show, after I was bored to death, he just comes back and his mother's suddenly dead, and I'm like, what the fuck? And then she makes this speech, which the setup for it I thought was boring as well. And then she gives a speech, and then a riot happens, and then the riot something happens, and then that's the end of the season. I don't know. That was my honest to god experience watching it. Because again, I thought it was really boring.
I mean, yeah, like I feel like a broken record, but like you are summarizing it in a way that is very reductive. You are summarizing it in bare bones. Like that is technically accurate, like in terms of like you've described the events of the story, but you haven't actually you haven't dived in and talked about like the meat of it. You haven't talked about why anything is happening. What specifically about like beyond the fact that it's boring, what specifically about it didn't hit hard enough?
I don't know, that her mother just suddenly died, and it's just like when he comes back, it's like, oh, that's suddenly a thing now. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, she was getting old and frail, and that's like a thing that was established from her introduction in episode 2 of the series.
Well,
like she
again,
was getting up there. She felt she had wasted her life. That's why she wanted to fight the Empire. That's why she wanted to stay behind and not just run away with Cassian. She knew she didn't have that much time left anyway. Well, it's not just some sudden development. And of course, like narratively, it needed to happen to push Cassian in the final direction of the story. Like he'd already escaped the prison, and he was already pretty devoted to like sticking it to the Empire. But the fact that he was not there for his mother in her final moments, and he didn't even get to say goodbye to her. Like, of course, that's gonna fuck with him, and of course, that's gonna sting him. Like that's necessary to get the story the rest of the way. And it happens very naturally, and it's set up.
Yeah, well, again, like when I watched it, it didn't come across like that at all. Like again, because it's like the way I was watching it, it was just like, oh, it's suddenly a thing now that she's dead, and it's not like I don't know, like I don't know what like maybe if I went into a little bit more detail, I'd say something like I don't know, like the thing with I don't know, for example, in Spider-Man, Uncle Ben's death was like seems very sudden all of a sudden that he's shot by a carjacker, but it's like it's set up in the fact that like even though we don't know that the guy that Peter let go would kill his uncle, it's like there's build up to his death, like where he sees a crowd surrounding an area, he gets a weird feeling, and I don't know, like that's probably what I'd say if what past me would say in that original video if I did decide to go into more detail.
I mean, there's also like, death. This is kind of like a thing with death, is that it's typically very sudden and unexpected.
Yeah, I know, but like I guess the thing is that also like they're telling a story and it doesn't have to be like exactly like real life and stuff. It can be dramatized for like
yes
and stuff. And I think something I need to keep in track for every Star Wars story more often is maybe it doesn't have to be exactly like real life, and it's not like real life, but there's a difference between what's realistic and what's believable. And I guess all that these stories have to be is believable, I suppose.
Would you say that Marva dying, quote unquote, suddenly is not believable?
Well, I just say it was abrupt when I watched it.
Yep, that was the point.
Well, I could say that like, oh yeah, she was old and she died, but like in the structure of the story, it's like, oh well, that's a thing now, and that's what I felt when I was watching it.
But it's not random though. Like you're treating it like it was random when again it was set up and it served the like that's when in the story it needed to happen. It couldn't happen earlier. It couldn't happen later. That was when it needed to happen.
Can you actually explain to me why it couldn't happen earlier or later? Well, let's just go with earlier because
talking about narratively. I'm talking about narratively, like in Cassian's journey. If it had happened before, he left for Neamos, the beach planet, that would have completely fucked over his arc, like completely. He'd have had nothing. Like whenever he goes, because he might still go to the beach planet. He might still get arrested. And he might even still be motivated against the Empire to an extent after getting out of the prison. Like he already wanted to like tell everyone what happened so that it could be like, dealt with on a larger scale. But like he needed that final push that happened right after he got out when he thought he was going to go home and see his mom and resolve all the issues that he had with her in that big explosive fight that they had right before he left. And then he never got a chance to. And he didn't get a chance to say goodbye.
I just like I don't know. Like I remember like a lot of what you're describing. A lot of similar stuff happened in a story like Spider-Man because it's like he yelled at his uncle that he wasn't his father and stopped pretending to be, and that he leaves with him on bad terms and he makes his Uncle Ben upset. And then the next time he sees him, he's nearly dead on the side of the street after being shot by a carjacker. I don't know. Like I just thought. Like, I don't know, that the way Spider-Man did it was much more memorable, if that makes sense.
I mean, they're both the same kind of thing. They left each other on bad terms, on a bad note. Or at least he felt that way. She didn't as much. But without the closure that was necessary.
Movies when it comes to this stuff, because earlier I referenced Joker and the subway scene, and it's like, oh, maybe they could have taken some more inspiration from this. But now that I'm thinking about it, it's almost like, I don't know, I think like the thing is like I thought that the actors came off like they were bored to be there, but like I'm thinking like, was there ever a scene of like the two like actually arguing and it was like done in a way where it's like they were yelling or screaming at each other and it was done dramatically? And
yes,
because I don't remember any of that. I just when I was watching the show, it just like felt like they were just talking like all the actors talked in that show like they were reading off an article of Confederation or something. Like it's almost like that character from Ferris Bueller's Day Off who was meant to be intentionally boring as a talker.
Yeah. Okay. So the scene I'm thinking of specifically where they have their argument is not acted that way. I wouldn't say any scene is acted in the way you're describing, but like that scene specifically, like they're getting into it. It gets kind of heated. Like it's a very emotional scene where both actors are giving it their all and they're doing a really good job. Basically, he wants to take the money that he made in the Aldani heist and he wants to run away and hide, and she doesn't want to. because again, she's getting old and she doesn't have much time left, and she doesn't want to waste the rest of her life like she has all these years. They're at an impasse. He can't stay, she can't go, that sort of thing. And so they have to split up, and he's not happy about it. He's worried for her. And then he reluctantly but ultimately agrees to leave. He says he's coming back, that this isn't over. And then by the time he's able to actually come back, she's already dead. Like it's too late. He doesn't get that closure. He gets some closure when he actually does return and he talks to his friend Brasso, because he was able to give him like her last words, which again were necessary to inspire him further into the rebel for the cause. But yeah, it's a really it's one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Wars, but like one of the best on the show. One of the ones that gets.
I guess my answer is always going to be the same. I didn't notice that because I was bored to death by the show.
I don't know what you want me to do with that.
Presentation of the story was weak, and I felt like the actors were just not giving two shits, so I didn't give two shits. Like, that's just my honest to God thoughts on it. Like it was just boring, and I couldn't.
It reads to me like, because you didn't give a shit, you interpreted it as though the actors themselves didn't give a shit.
I mean, like, I don't know. It's just like I just have this like idea that like in my head that like the actors were very, very bored to be there. Like they almost like didn't care. They cared as little as I did, and they just were there. Like they really hated themselves for being like. I know that's probably not what happened, but like it almost come across like it was what happened. Like that Diego
it doesn't come across like that at all. Like they all look like they're having a good time being there. I mean, the scenes themselves, like are very tonally like characters are unhappy and like miserable in a lot of scenes. So like they can come across as miserable because that's the tone of the scene and they're doing their jobs. But like you don't get the impression that they're not having a good time. I don't know how you'd even like. I don't know how you would come to that conclusion. I really don't.
Well, I'm sorry, but like that's how it felt like to me, because I don't know, like I'm trying to think if there's some way I could get you to understand that like why I found this show boring, because the thing is that like I guess maybe by telling you that like I've tried telling you that like a common complaint is that it's too slow from other people, and I tried to expand on that and saying it's too slow because the pacing is terrible and things take forever to happen from major plot point to major plot point, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of momentum going on. It just feels like scenes just drag on. Like, I don't know how to describe it else in a way where it's like you understand why I find it boring.
Yeah, I know that a common criticism of the show is that it's slow. Like, I just don't. I mean, well, first of all, it is slow in the sense that it is intentionally a slow burn. That's just the type of show it is. Asking it to be something else is asking it to fundamentally change what it is, and I don't see why we would do that.
I don't know. Like, it was criticized. Like, it also, despite the fact that it deviates from Rogue One in a lot of ways, the one thing that I thought was consistent with was being like, it's almost like I almost feel like Andor was like Rogue One if it went on forever.
Okay, do you mean that like just because it's longer? Because like obviously it's going to be longer.
I don't know. Like, at least I could say at least that like Rogue One was an eventful movie. Like, I don't know. Like I felt like not enough happened in Andor, and you will probably disagree with that. But like what I mean is like when it comes to important plot point to important plot point, it just feels like it like when like things that important that happen, like extremely important things that happen, they're too scarce from each other or something.
But every scene has events that are extremely important. I keep saying this. Like, there is no scene in any of the episodes where I'm like, you could have taken that out, and like no, you'd be missing stuff. It is all important. I don't know what else you want. Like, are you arguing that like they're like slow burns just are intrinsically bad? Like nothing can ever be slowly paced?
Well, I don't really know what to say because that's my complaints on the show. I thought it was slow and boring, and it could have been better than that. And I don't know.
Okay. Let's see. What else is there?
Again, I wasn't really sure what to say about the show when it came out, but I felt obligated to review it and to watch it and make a review on it. So I tried the best I could, but I guess it wasn't good enough.
No, I don't think it was. The thing is, I've already said this, but I'll say it again. Like, you have to be able to you have to pay attention to every single thing. You have to you need to know the thing that you're reviewing back to front, basically. Like, that's the best way to go about it. I understand if that's not something you want to do with Andor, but like, you don't have to make a video about Andor.
Well, it's an obligate. I felt obligated. That's the thing. People were gonna ask me why I didn't review it, and I have to tell them all because I don't know. It's just that pressure that got to me. To put a review out.
There are things that people want me to review that I'm just like, no, this isn't really my thing. Like, I'm not I'll say something like I liked it or I didn't like it, but either way, I'll just be like, I'm not going to make a video about it because it's just not something I'm interested in making a video about.
Well, the thing is I think the difference with me is that this was Star Wars content. So since it is Star Wars by branding, I have to talk about it if I want to be a Star Wars everyman. And that's my goal with my channel.
I mean, I also try to cover as much of Star Wars as I possibly can, but for example, I don't really care about Resistance. I watched the first 5 episodes of that and just couldn't get into it. So I'm not going to make a video reviewing it, probably. And if I do, obviously, if I do, I'll watch the show and I'll take notes and I'll make sure I have all my references and I have my ducks in a row. Because that's you have to do that if you're going to be a critic. You have to.
Yeah. Andor wasn't a very easy show to talk about, but you're correct. I guess
I would even agree with that too. When I eventually do talk about Andor, in any kind of real depth, it's going to be hard because there's a lot to talk about and it's kind of complex.
But just keep in mind, I still think the show is boring as shit, and I don't think my mind is going to be changed on that front.
I wouldn't try to. Again, I can see why a lot of people find this show boring. I don't see that as a valid criticism against the show, but if you find it boring, then you find it boring.
But I mean, I also wanted to put forth that a lot of people seem to think it's boring, for example, because they had to air some episodes of this show on television instead of the streaming service because it was just that people just weren't interested in it.
And that's fine. That also I don't think matters when talking about the quality.
Well, I mean, the thing is some people might say that Solo bombing at the box office, for example, is proof of the fact that Star Wars is losing money and people aren't interested in it anymore because of what Disney's fucking doing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there are people who just refuse to watch Andor outright because of how bad everything else has been. And the people that I've gotten to watch the show, despite that, have all come away saying it's really good. So, I don't know.
I don't know. I do think, to be honest, I do think it's fair if that's your reason for not watching Andor because if everything else is crap, then why would this magically be good? I kind of understand that mentality, but something on the other hand, not reading the expanded universe because you're too lazy to read, I think that's a different problem altogether.
I mean, but do you not see how that's essentially the same thing, right? Not reading the expanded universe because you're too lazy to read is the same as not watching all of Andor and paying attention because you just couldn't be fucked to because you found it boring. And then going on YouTube and making a 40-minute video about it.
Well, I mean, it was a 40-minute video, which is short by my standards.
Yeah, but it's still a video. like that made points theoretically.
Well, I mean, like, it was my, like, the thing is like, again, I was obligated and I was trying my hardest to review it as best as I could, but I just couldn't do it.
Okay.
Properly, yes. I guess when I was releasing it, I felt like, was I missing something? Or how's people going to think about this review? But, like, I don't know, like, for some reason, Rogue One is easier to assess, and it's, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
I will say that it's inoffensive as a Star Wars show, but it was just also boring as shit. Like, anything I criticize it for beyond it being boring, it doesn't have any impact on anything else besides maybe Rogue One. So,
Okay,
just
but
leave it be.
so can you actually say the show is bad if it doesn't have anything to criticize other than that it's boring?
I mean, I guess you could criticize something because there's nothing to it, which is how I
But
thought
there's
about it.
not nothing to it. Like, just because you didn't catch any of it because you didn't pay attention doesn't mean that there's nothing to it. Oh, sorry, like I'm not trying to be rude. I feel like we're talking in circles here.
You know, I guess, like, it's all hard to describe because, like, but I always resented, like, how people talked about it like it's some masterpiece, and I don't think it's anything close to a masterpiece. Even with what you're describing about the arcs and stuff, because, like, I don't know, it's just like, it still doesn't look like Star Wars, it doesn't feel like Star Wars, and it, like the story based on what you described could be good, I suppose, but I don't know. Something about it just doesn't feel great, even based on what you're describing. And I would still argue that it's nowhere close to being peak Star Wars or whatever.
I mean, okay, but like it not being peak doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or even not good.
Well, what I'm pointing out is, like, a lot of people say it's peak Star Wars, and that's what I really resent. Like, people, like, being expected to like this show, and when I call it boring and I was put to sleep by it, which is 100% brutal honesty. Like, I just got surrounded by people telling me that they can't take me seriously anymore, or that I have a lacking attention span, and that just infuriated me.
Okay.
I mean, you're not doing that, but there was lots of other people who did, is the point. And I also thought a lot of people didn't really talk, like, well, a lot of videos I watched didn't really talk about Andor properly. Like, everything you're telling me, like, about the depth of it, like, the videos that I watched didn't do that.
Okay.
It was mostly just, it's dark, or it's mature, or it's really good, or empty statements like that, if that makes sense. So I always had the impression that, like, these people are just shallow, filthy casuals who think that Andor is art because they can't read a Star Wars book, which would be probably 100 times better than whatever they're watching. Or maybe it's just like Andor is just something that people have convinced is really good because we've got a lot of lacking Star Wars content. So when we've got something that's inoffensive, it's hailed as a masterpiece. It's like I heard I remember the same thing was said about The Mandalorian when in its overrated stage, where it was like it came out and people just flipped their shit over it. And look at this show now; it's fucking terrible.
Okay, so can I kind of draw back for a second, because like to address the kinds of people that infuriate you, that are Andor fans who have said you don't have an attention span or that you just didn't get it or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean this in the nicest way possible. Please hear me out. I think they're right. I think that if someone like me or anyone else who says Andor is good or that it is peak Star Wars has that opinion, of course you're welcome to disagree. but how can you really disagree and be like taken seriously if you have not paid attention to the show? If you like admittedly just didn't really like catch all of these things that are kind of right there in your face. That you even said in your video that you were playing Tetris on your phone.
That was
Like,
after like an hour or two of trying to watch it straight, and I was like, oh, I can't get through this thing without trying to entertain myself, like make my own fun.
well, but that's my point. You do seem to have a very short attention span, at least when it comes to this show. I don't know if that's the way with everything that you watch or read.
Well, I try to like look at Star Wars intently, you know. So like, I thought it was surprised. It actually surprised me how much I found Andor boring, because it seemed like it would be like almost Rogue One except it's a television show. And even though I was a little bit bored by Rogue One, it wasn't anywhere near the level of Andor. You know, I would have just thought it would have been Star Wars Rebels boring or Ahsoka boring or something like that. But there was something, like, as I said, I found Andor insufferably boring, if that makes sense. Like, it's almost like I was watching paint dry. That's how bored it was, and I almost fell asleep, and that sort of insults that I commonly give the show.
Okay, but like, do you see what I'm getting at?
I'm trying to, I guess I'm still in the middle of trying to understand why I found it boring, but
I mean, there are plenty of reasons you might have found it boring. It's just, it might just not be your kind of show.
In your opinion, why do you think I found it boring based on what I described and what I'm trying to make a case for? Because, like I said, that I thought the presentation was bad. The actors felt like they were bored to be there, and like other stuff that I've said.
I mean, that it was slow paced and had scenes that you just didn't think needed to be there. Like, I can see why that would translate to this is boring. I don't agree that that's the case, but obviously I can see why. Like, I can see why a lot of people would find it boring, because it is very slow and it takes its time and it grounds you in the characters and the world and the setting, and isn't just action, 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 action. I can see why anyone would find that boring.
Would Andor have been bad if it had more action scenes, though?
It just depends on how they do it. Like something that really frustrates me about a lot of the new Star Wars shows is that there are always like these mandatory like 1 to 2 action scenes per episode that come out of nowhere. They're not necessary at all, but they want to keep the audience engaged and entertained. So they're just like, boom, let's just have them fight a giant monster. Or, oh no, fuck, these TIE fighters are attacking Bo-Katan and the Mandalorian. Oh no. They don't ever add anything. They're just kind of there to kill 5 minutes. And like, a show like Andor, it had the amount of action scenes that were necessary to tell the story. It didn't need any more, didn't need any less. So I don't see that it would have been any better or worse, but it could have been worse depending on like if they shoehorned in action scenes where they weren't necessary.
I'm just wondering though if they could have like adjusted the story or changed the story even to accommodate more action scenes and making the thing more naturally entertaining and still being as revered as it is by Andor fans now, and maybe even more people like me even.
So what if they altered the structure of the story so that they could accommodate more action scenes, and in so doing they sacrificed the integrity of the story, like they made the narrative cheaper? What if they omitted information?
I was trying to say, but like I don't know, like how I said that, like for example, like earlier I said that like something still could have been beloved and be completely different. Like if someone made a sequel to like a certain highly critically acclaimed movie and the sequel was also acclaimed, but they decided to go in a completely different direction for the sequel in an alternate timeline, and it still was received as well as it was in the same timeline. I don't like that's the point I'm making.
So I mean, yeah, I guess maybe, and we don't know this for sure, but maybe there is some hypothetical version of Andor that has more action scenes and is just as good, if not better. Like maybe.
Like I'm just like I like I'd crave for a version of that might actually exist in an alternate universe, almost like something that like can still have complexity, can still have this, it can still have that, but it's actually something I found entertaining. And like when I say entertaining, I'm not saying like some alternate universe where I found the show entertaining, but like rather me going into this other universe, watching this alternate show, and I find it entertaining. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like,
Well, it's just like I don't know. Like you could do this with anything. I could be like, oh, they should take Empire Strikes Back and alter it to some arbitrary specification that would make it better. And you'd be like, well, I mean, but did they need to? And I'm just like, no, but they could.
I don't know. It's just that like the thing is that like a lot of people, it's not just me that found Andor too slow and too boring.
I know
Like,
that, but I just don't see that as an issue.
I don't know. I just thinking like, couldn't there be a way where the where Andor fans, Star Wars fans, and the general audience all find Andor to be great or something? I don't know. Like I'm thinking like some sort of there's like something they could have done to make it that way, but they didn't.
I guess. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say there, honestly.
Like I don't know. Like I guess it's rough what I'm trying to say because like I wouldn't really change Revenge of the Sith, for example, but there's already so many stupid rewrites of the film, and it's like annoying to me because it's like, oh, you don't get it, or you're not getting the significance of it. But it's like, I
I
guess
mean,
the thing is like the people who most commonly criticize the prequels, like aren't even Star Wars fans to begin with, and they don't care about the complexities of it or any of it. And the way they complain about it, it's very shallow most of the time.
mhm.
Like I
um,
wanted this or I wanted that.
okay, but like, so what's interesting about that is because you keep talking about like what the show could have done differently to appeal to more fans, and I'm just, I don't ever want to live in a world, and I say this as if we don't already, but I don't ever want to live in a world where we're creating shows that are meant to appease mass audiences rather than actually just tell a good story. Like, it's not going to please everyone, and that's okay as long as it tells a good story.
Hmm. Well, I wasn't trying to say that. I was just like I am like try. I would describe myself as a hardcore Star Wars fan, and I would say that I was bored to death by Andor, and I would have loved nothing more to enjoy it. Just as like I would have loved to enjoy Rebels or Ahsoka, but I don't.
Yeah,
And
okay. Um, I did want to move on to just because I have one more point that I wanted to address, and then I kind of want to open the floor to you and just see if you have any other criticisms we haven't gone over yet. But before we do that, I did get a super chat from Lucky Kennedy for $2.
fucking hell,
He's addressing you. Hi, JJ. How's it going?
I don't want to speak to him because he's just given me so much crap over the past few months.
Okay, well, we can move on then. Um, sorry about that. You said that it was convenient that Kino wasn't able to swim, which I found interesting since that really doesn't affect the story one way or another. But like, because the prison break obviously would have succeeded either way,
I
and
don't know.
Kino's
It's
fate
just
is
like
less
these days, a
ambiguous.
lot of people know how to swim, and in the Star Wars galaxy or something, I would have thought like most people would have learned how to swim by now. I don't know. It's
I
just
mean,
something like occurred to me.
I can think of plenty of reasons why you wouldn't have learned to swim in the Star Wars galaxy, like up to the age that Kino is. Like say living on a desert planet like Tatooine, it's probably not a skill that you're gonna just learn. But also like in the real world here on Earth, there are a lot of people that I've met personally who are in their adulthood who have just never learned how to swim. Like that's just a thing. Um,
Well, I mean, I guess I've forgotten how to swim actually, because I tried doing it years later and I was struggling, but you know what, never mind. I just would have thought that Kino Loyal Golem or whoever the hell he is, he would have learned how to swim. He seems like that sort of character, but I guess that's not really valid.
Well, I also just think that, like, again, we're talking about the themes. We have the added context that we weren't privy to before, which is that this entire time, Kino understood that he likely wasn't making it out of this prison alive, even if the plan did work due to his inability to swim. But he still did what he did anyway, rallying the rest of the prison into fighting their oppressors because he cared about his men and wanted them to get home. Like, so I think this is like we've made it, we've written it so that Kino isn't able to swim, which is realistic enough. And from that, we're then able to have this great like character beat for him, what it means that he did these things, knowing that he probably wasn't going to make it out alive. Like I see only good writing out of that.
Yeah, I don't think that's really a complaint, I guess, but
okay. Well, so that was the last point that I wanted to address. So, was there anything else that we haven't gone over yet that you wanted to say?
Sorry, I'm just a bit stressed.
That's all right. It's just you and me right now. Don't even look at chat.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that.
I mean, we don't have to keep going either. We can end the stream here if you're comfortable with that.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to speak about? Like, is there a note you skipped over?
No, I think I covered about everything I wanted to cover.
All right. Well, is there anything else that I brought up that maybe we could speak about?
Nothing I can think of that we haven't already kind of gone over at length. I guess I would ask you, like, what do you rate Andor out of 10 after everything we've gone over?
I don't know. Pi?
Okay. I mean, that's a bit lower than I would give it, but yeah.
Yeah, you know what number I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, 3.14159.
Yeah. Like, I just thought, like, if I can't decide, I just give it a pi out of 10.
It's an irrational number. It's an irrational rating. Well, I mean, I guess if there's nothing else we want to go over, then I think I'll probably close out this stream now.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on, man. This was a real pleasure.
So, do I press leave studio?
Yeah, you do. I'll just go ahead and close out of the stream. Thank you guys for watching. You can find JJ's content in the description. It's linked. He's gone. Whew. Yeah, no, seriously. Thank you for watching. That was great.